This is the Analysis in Change with Nathan Williams and Neal Kieran.
Welcome to Analysis in Chains. I'm Nathan Williams. Neal is actually away at a wedding this week, so filling in is my good friend David DePel. David, thanks for joining me.
My very great pleasure. How are you?
Good. David and I have been working all week on an event here in Berlin called Blockchain for Africa. It's a topic that has come up a fair bit in the past few weeks for us because a lot of people are hopeful that blockchain will give Africa the ability to sort of leapfrog existing technologies. And the question remains, how can that happen without the continent of Africa being just a mere taker of the technology, but a producer of the technology?
Yeah, Nathan, and that's a really important point. The opportunity, I think, exists for African information technology professionals, and in fact, many of them are already hard at work on different applications to crosswalk what has largely been developed in the developed world and to say, let's own this for ourselves. Let's develop applications that suit our needs and create knowledge that works for us.
A lot of people are hopeful for that, especially because blockchain really was founded as a technology for the people, right? A technology that isn't centralized in a big company. And there's definitely the resources and the people in Africa who have the desire and the ability to move this forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm aware already in Rwanda and in Ghana and Kenya, South Africa, teams and groups are already designing, thinking, implementing.
Personally, just from the talking, I think that the one key element that's going to be required is unified policy. Honestly, like even though this is really a decentralized technology and is sort of founded by crypto anarchists, I think just we will need state acceptance if we're going to see a mass production of this technology on the continent.
Yeah, well, you can hear from my accent and you know it well. I'm an Australian living in Australia, but the hat that I'm wearing in the conversation we're having now is chair of the Africa Research Group at Murdoch University. And recently, you and I and many others were here in Perth for Africa Down Under, and which is a big conference around mining in Africa. And the conversations we had there were very much around looking at what policy settings are needed to foster real innovation.
I really liked the approach that Mauritius took. Because Mauritius, they wanted to set up a blockchain center of excellence, and I was chatting with some of the delegates while we were down there. And what they did is they created a sandbox license. So as long as you're part of their group, part of their accelerator, making sure that you're not overtly defrauding people, then they give you sort of a trial period or an exemption to sort of play in the sandbox, and they update and they follow along with you to make sure things are going well. And I think that approach is very healthy for this emerging tech, because if you codify all sorts of laws and regulations based on your projection of where the technology is going to develop, it's going to be way too slow and be outdated before it even gets codified into law.
There's an urgency about this as well, too, though. This is not a abstract conversation or things that, well, wouldn't it be fun to develop something? There's need everywhere as well as opportunity. And so if you think about the use cases, obviously, yourself, you're deep into the topic of ethical mining and how to use the transparency of blockchain to marry up with organizations like Transparency International and others that have been working on the EITI framework for mining. I can see similar things in the area of fishing, in agriculture, If you look at what Ag Unity is doing in terms of their development, both their pilot programs in Kenya and then some of the exciting work they're starting in Ethiopia as well, you really get the sense that this can make a material difference.
I wonder what, I mean, it's sort of hard to prognosticate how it's going to play out, because really to have a good regulatory framework, you need cooperation amongst governments, and that's always a challenge. It's a challenge in Europe, it's a challenge in Asia, it's a challenge everywhere. But I wonder if the possibility of aligned incentives can help with that cooperation. You know, if people see, okay, well, you know, this is a way of really jumpstarting our economy.
Yeah, so I was having a conversation with Maximilian Jarrett the other day, who's in Berlin there, and is going to be part of this conference we've got coming up in a couple of weeks. And he is of Liberian descent, but he's a real Pan-Africanist, and he is really exercising his mind at the moment about what the supernatural, not supernatural, but supranational structures would be. How, so the African Union is one body. There are also the various trading blocks within Africa as well, whether it's ECOWAS on the Western countries, COMESA on the east and the south, SADC. There's a lot of work being done on the continent at the moment about harmonization, increasing trade, making it easier to work within and between countries.
Do you think that something of this nature requires its own entity, like a Pan-African blockchain group or something to that effect? Or do you think it would more easily fit below the umbrella of someone else?
Well, I think it's both and maybe many more besides as well. Professor Kevin Arama, who's an adjunct professor at Murdoch University, but is also a special advisor to the president of the African Development Bank, he called at the conference in Perth for a working group to be set up at the level of the Africa Union. And I thought that was, that was a real clear declarative statement that he made. Obviously, his personal opinion, not that of the banks formally, but something like that, I think, would be really helpful.
Everyone at a state level is sort of competing for blockchain supremacy, right? I mean, the countries that have the most to lose right now are sort of the wealthier countries that have established banking practices, a lot of established infrastructure and policy infrastructure that they want to make sure blockchain doesn't erode. But then you see smaller countries, especially ones that want to make a name for themselves in the industry, like Mauritius, like Malta, like Estonia, the Cayman Islands, Singapore, Switzerland, that are really going all in on blockchain to try and capture the title of being center of the crypto market.
Yeah. So one set of questions is around that framework and what countries will offer that well and best. And if you look at what Malta has done, I think they've done an incredible job in being very methodical about developing legislation, creating an authority, and then beginning to build the various structures needed for this to be not highly regulated, but really sound and trustworthy in and of itself. And so I think there's a model there that can be emulated across the continent as well too.
I mean, I think we're going to continue to see a rural-urban divide. We see it everywhere, but I think it's even more stark in Africa because you have real technological challenges with blockchain. It's like you're not going to run a node if you're living in a village that has intermittent access to electricity, and I think that as African entrepreneurs go forward, we're going to have to, by necessity, see technological solutions that work around the infrastructure limitations.
Yeah, sure. And so Ag Unity did a lot of thinking about this and using some sort of mesh communications as well, the ability to be have things on your smartphone, but not assuming that you're always online and that it'll, when you do get a signal and connect, then things sync up. And there's some great creativity there. Others that I know are looking at saying, can this also be delivered to people who are not literate? And the thinking around that, I think, is also quite innovative as well, which then democratizes it and brings it very much down to the level in the rural areas of people that can benefit from it, but don't have all the things that we just take for granted.
So David and I are both going to be at a conference that's hosted by Murdoch University on October the 5th. Called Blockchain for Africa. We got Peter Eigen, who's going to be keynote speaker there.
Yes, and people may or may not know the name, but he is the founder of Transparency International.
Yeah, and the chair of the Africa Progress Group, correct? Co-chair. Co-chair.
Yeah.
Co-chair,
along with former president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, who also gave some really strong statements at the conference in Perth, and quite a bit of news was picked up around his announcements, particularly as it related to corruption and transparency, and the idea of visibility of information being, the best counter to people who would prefer to do things in secret.
I think that's it's an important point, honestly, because as much as we're excited to see African entrepreneurship blossom and a new industry go, there's also just the very simple issue of avoiding and stemming corruption from the immutability aspect of blockchain. You can't go and change your records after the fact, and that's where 90% of the corruption happens.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's going to be an interesting conversation, I think. And so I encourage everyone to come out. It'll be, you can get your ticket at blockchain4africa.org, blockchain4africa.org. And it'll be in Berlin, and all the details will be on the website. Yeah. So anyway, David, thanks for having a chat with me, and everyone else, see you at the conference.
My very great pleasure. Thanks, Nathan.